that's because they do it from glucose measures. They should be
Hmm.
checking fasted insulin, and they'd see it 10 years earlier. Nayiri, g- one thing on your list for us to talk about is the NHS. Please help us with this. We're in the United States of America where we can flip off our doctors and walk out, and it happens regularly.
Yes.
Uh, the horror stories that the
Oh
people
my
with
God,
type
no.
1 on the NHS system, I keep tagging you on these conversations.
I've
It's
helped
like they,
a few people from your group came to me and I obviously advised them, etc. But look, I mean, anything I've ever wanted tested, I've had it tested
yeah,
on NHS.
Now, is
It's,
that because your
hey, I want
GP?
hormones. I want menopause hormones. I want the progesterone. I want this estradiol and the bioidentical one. Yeah, my GP just wrote it for me. She said, can you do a mammogram first? I said, I don't want a mammogram. It's not part of the NHS requirement. She said, okay, that's fine. You know, they asked if I wanted a statin. I said, no, okay, that's fine. So I personally have had no complaints about the NHS. Obviously, it's a large organization.
we see a
It is
completely
going
different
to
thing.
have
Oh my God.
inefficiencies here and
Yeah.
there, but it does vary from area to area. That's one
I
thing.
was say I have
I can,
a friend who lives in Canada, and she's always asking me to move there because of their health care.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
No,
No.
no.
no, but honestly, I
I'm
mean,
dealing with
I lived in
TRICARE and VA stuff with my husband, and like even that's better than like what I read about up in Canada, depending on where you live. Like if you have the funding in your area. If you go
Right.
live out in Podunk, like you have one option and you can't choose anything else. And I like having options
in
The
because
fact,
example, the example I gave of the doctor that said there's no difference between type 1 and type 2 and argued with this patient about there's no difference was an NHS doctor.
The
you
one
have
who
to
said you
question, of
can't be a type
course.
1 because you're 50 and fat was an NHS
I
doctor in
Yeah.
mean,
yeah,
Scotland.
And
but I wouldn't say that. I mean, you see that from everywhere. You see that from European doctors. You see that from, someone in Sweden has been told that the other
The
day. They
difference is
wrote in my. So
they don't
you
have any
see it
recourse.
everywhere. But
They just don't. Yeah, I'm sorry.
it's, I don't know. I mean,
we feel for
the
those
last
people.
4 years, since 2021, I lived, okay, so I lived, and I'm talking about long-term living, not just a short vacation, right? I lived in the United States. I lived in Canada, lived in Mexico, and now back in the UK. I'm always happy to pay out of pocket for my healthcare.
Okay.
And despite that, this is where I am. I feel happy, maybe because I'm used to the system, but this is where I got exactly what I wanted, not paying a penny for any of the services that I want. Obviously, I would have paid if I had to, but hey, I pay my taxes here. So the NHS offered all the tests that I wanted, except the CAC score, which I paid out of pocket.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
had that done in
we
Florida.
pay out of pocket too.
It
that's
was like
pretty
100,
affordable actually. Yeah.
$100, can't remember, 100 or $120. So I had that done in the US because it's not covered routinely by the NHS, but I'll take
I,
that. So
I didn't mean to knock the system as a whole, okay, but the problem is that when the patients who don't have a good outcome, they don't have any recourse.
no,
We could go to Walmart and buy insulin. If we're crazy enough, there are many things that we can do. But
Also, Paul, I think the problem falls when people find themselves in a position of having to advocate for themselves, having never had to do that before, and they're fighting a system, right?
yeah,
Versus an opinion
Exactly.
of a doctor, right? When I fight with my doctor about statins, I'm fighting an opinion, right? I'm not fighting a system that has put in place some what appear to me at least, and here your experience has obviously been different, but some pretty either inflexible guidelines or physicians that are afraid to bend the guidelines, right? And treat a patient like an outlier. So, I mean, the consistency of it, I mean, just as a armchair statistician here, I can't quantify it, but there's a trend toward sort of just between New Zealand and the UK. I can almost always tell when someone starts talking about their experience by some of the language that they use. Well, the consultant said, that sort of thing. I can usually pick up on them, and I do see that they are frustrated and that they're getting a lot of outdated information and don't have access to some of the insulins that we do. And again, just an observation. I don't know if anybody else shares it, but that's how I feel.
I usually also, not recently, because I've left a lot of the mainstream type 1 diabetic groups for my own mental health.
Same.
People would get diagnosed, and then instead of, within a week or two, you'd learn about even like sliding scale or dosing or what have you, some sort of rudimentary skill to make it so you don't die accidentally utilizing your insulin.
Quickly.
Dangerous. This is a very dangerous thing. I've seen people wait up to 2 years to get in to see, I think it's called, somebody teaching them, it's called Daphne. I don't know what it stands for, but it's how normally, but they aren't given the rudimentary skills. They're literally waiting for 2 years to be able to learn how to bolus for their carbs properly and things like that. And so now they're on Dr. Facebook trying to figure things out. And that always bothered me. I know that I was told to come in at my earliest convenience, but within a week, I was there with a certified diabetes educator and an endocrinologist in teaching me that I could eat whatever I want and dose for it and take pills later in life. I mean, but it kept me alive. I understood the severity of like, hey, insulin can be dangerous if not used properly. But that bothers me that people, the whole having to go to Dr. Facebook or Dr. Google, and then I get in trouble because I have certifications in other groups when I talk about Dr. Facebook, because I'm not qualified and I shouldn't be telling.
Are you a medical professional?
Are you a CDE? You shouldn't do that. You can't do that. I'm like, I'm not prescribing anything. I'm literally saying, hey, it looks like when you eat rice, it doesn't work well for you. Have you considered like cauliflower? And like, that's like the end of it. And then they're like, well, like that's not me prescribing anything. That's literally me saying, what if we swapped this out instead? Or, you know what I use to dose for protein? That looks like a protein spike. I use R or an extended bolus on my pump, depending on the situation. That works really well for me. Have you tried looking into that? That's like, I'm not prescribing. It's all from my own point of view of what works for me. But
right.
Yeah, a lot of Dr. Google, a lot of Dr. Facebook.
This is a big problem for our community because people want the support of their medical professionals.
Right, they want to go in
a low carb diet or a
we want to get a pat on the back for doing well, and sometimes instead we get backlash because we don't eat a potato.
So people want to be, people trust their doctors.
Yes.
It's a difficult barrier because it takes them years often to come to terms with the fact that their doctors haven't been helping them all along.
It'd take them a lot less time if they talk to us. Why don't they to the diabetic groups
some do,
who have succeeded wildly?
No, some do. I'm constantly
Dr. Ken Berry is one. Love the guy.
Yeah.
He's great, okay? He's obviously succeeded with type 1s. He doesn't understand how to grade himself on a curve, but he's not really doing all that well. And if he'd ask us, we could probably, really tune up his game. And it just sounds like such an arrogant thing, but I deal with thousands of type 1s daily. And they all come to our group because they're just in crisis. They're not your average type 1 who walks into a clinic. They're all problem cases who come into our group.
Or because they're sent to your group.
Yes. Maybe they heard it on a podcast that they were listening to, and suddenly you get an influx of people.
I want to come back to the fear of insulin we were talking about earlier, and not understanding the importance of insulin in type 1 diabetic, right? Because we're focusing on, as you said, Paul, we're focusing on the glucose, right?
Yeah.
So people wrongly assume that when they start carnivore, that's it, they've healed their diabetes and they're never going to need insulin again. And it doesn't take them long to discover that that's not working out for them. The same happens when people go or approach fasting, because I have a group for type 1 diabetics who want to fast. And I'm not saying everyone should be fasting, everyone should go on a 10-day fast or whatever. But if they want to, the group is there for support. And so many people come in and say, but, you know, I just stopped taking my insulin because I just wanted to fast. It's like,
No.
that's wrong. That's
You get to see me.
Welcome to
I think-
DKA.
where does it come from? The fear of insulin.
So I think before we talk about the importance of insulin for people with type 1 diabetes, we should talk about the importance of insulin for everyone,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Right? Because even a non-diabetic can go into ketoacidosis, right? Even a non-diabetic is going to lose muscle mass without insulin, right? I mean, my point is all of those things that it does helps build muscle mass, regulates your electrolytes, supports your brain function, protects your blood, like all of those things that insulin does, everyone needs, right? And so now it's no different than me taking thyroid medication. My body is killing off my thyroid medication. I have to replace it. My body is killing off my insulin. I have to replace it. It's so simple as to be almost sort of like remedial to even have to have that conversation. The fear is that there's a couple things. The shots, people are terrified of the shots. Like, I'm sorry, aren't we all adults? Haven't we all had blood drawn? Like, it's not that big a deal. And I get it. I'm not needle phobic, so maybe I'm the wrong person to ask. But is it a lot of responsibility? Yeah, it is a lot of responsibility. It's complicated, right? And I understand how people that are not necessarily intellectually gifted or, you know, in other ways challenged can find that terrifying, right? So, you know, even though I wasn't afraid of it, I understand why people are, right? They've heard horror stories, they've seen horror stories, they can't imagine having to carb count and shoot themselves up. It's a lot. It is a lot, right? Some people take to it and go, all right, yep, all right, I'm going to pull up my big girl pants and I'm going to do this. And other people go crawl into a little ball in the corner and don't want to come out. And so the big problem is lack of support and mental health counseling for people that are dealing with this. It's bad. There's nothing out there. I maybe you guys see it differently, but I've been thinking a lot about that lately.
I
like
think that
Barbara said-
personality difference
yeah.
plays a big role, right? There's those of us that say, hey, there's this thing, or for me, right? You told me I can't do this. Them's fighting words in my world.
Right? I'm going to go do
But
it.
when I was diagnosed, I was told I would never have kids and I would not live past 25. I won't tell you numbers, but we've passed that and I have 2 children, right? But really, it probably a large portion of not that, because I was traditional carb for a long time, back when we did carb counts, which at least was somewhat better than eat whatever, because it was, you're going to eat this amount. We don't care if it's a piece of pie today for lunch and that's all you have, but at least kind of reined some of that in.
But your boy is stunted.
Yes. They warned me, right, as a type 1, that my children would be impacted, because obviously I was pregnant during both of them.
What is he, 6'8"?
Yeah, I think
He
he's
could have been
6'7".
7 feet tall.
I'm so glad I stunted him. We started giving him coffee at like 2 to kind of.
That's fine.
Yeah, no, he was a 21-inch 9-pound preemie.
Oh my God.
And they told me that was because I was diabetic and I was young and, was like, and to be fair, my first pregnancy, my blood sugar was a hot mess and I was high risk and I was on bed rest for months. Both of us were not healthy. So I believed them. I went, yes, I have a 9-pound preemie because I'm diabetic and it's all my fault. I don't believe that anymore because I think there's some genetics. I don't think my blood sugar 20 years ago is still at play in said child. Um, my youngest is 14. I'm 5'9". My youngest is 14, and I think I have an inch on her. I'm going to be the short one of the family at 5'9". She was also early. She was 9'9". There were some other things at play with that one, but I was smart enough by then to be like, there's some genes here. My 5-year-old is, 4 foot tall. I don't believe you. Just the things, but yeah. So telling me I can't do something is not well received in my world. And so I did greet it as this is just how life is now. And we're going to do these things and we're going to tackle it head on. But we see people that don't, and they struggle. The people that, you look at RG, you look at, they kind of approach it from that engineering side or that type A personality, hello firefighter, where we go, hey, there's this problem. How do we fix it? How do we attack it? How do we conquer this? They do well. The people that have never been taught to advocate for themselves, have never been taught that they can question anything, that's a struggle. And I think there's more mental health resources than there used to be. We're starting to see specialists that are familiar with long-term illness and disease, and that have that slant to their PTSD training, because really that's what it is, right? We have trauma from our diagnosis or our experiences or being gaslit by the doctors for years. And also just the fact that our life now looks different than we thought it would. But unless you understand, when I first decided that I would go talk to somebody about some of the trauma stuff in my life, which was not my T1 side, but with what I do, I figured I had some. And the therapist at the time told me that because I wasn't having a reoccurring same nightmare, that it wasn't bad enough for me to receive help for PTSD. So if you're walking in with, hey, here's all this medical baggage, well, you're not having nightmares necessarily that you know of, right? You might not be sleeping, but you're not pinpointing it back to that. To this day, right? They still are like, well, how's your sleep? I sleep is crap. And they're always like, why? I'm like, I don't know. I mean, the fire department tones drop. Could it be a blood sugar day? Could it be there's so many things that affect my sleep, but one of those is the PTSD shows up that way. But yeah, thankfully I knew enough to not listen to said lady, and have been receiving treatment for PTSD. I have a PTSD and ADHD diagnosis. Yay. That spicy brain thing. And my therapist does have some training with medical complications and things like that side. And we've talked about it. It hasn't been our primary, but she's also told me that if we get into the point where we realize we need additional resources, she can find them. And I think that wasn't a thing 20 years ago. Even from a first responder side, we would go in and tell people why we were having problems, and we would break our therapists, because normal people don't want to hear, if I'm having problems with it, they probably don't want to hear it. And we're starting to see that change. And there's something called EMDR that allows you to get treatment for that, and really makes a difference without having to rehash all of that. And Sarah, you're upside down.
Right. I dropped for some reason. I had to reboot. All right, I'm here. Sorry.
That I think would be something that, as the type 1 community and as EMDR gets easier to get a hold of, I think we could really see that impact the confidence of our type 1s and the people who say, no, I can stand up and be a voice for myself and take those steps. And I think that would help. But people have to be willing to go do that. And yet again, there's a stigma, right? So we have a stigma with type 1 and we have a stigma with mental health. And, you say PTSD and people go, oh, and I think you have to get to that point. It's kind of like an addiction. You have to get to the point where you go, I can't do this. I'm not okay. I need additional help. And that's scary. But also, the more of us that admit that we have been there and that it's working and that it's helping, I think the more normalized some of that will be. So, kind of like what Stephanie was talking, right? That she intentionally models that behavior. I'm in therapy because one of my fire officers from a previous department said, "Hey, I realized I wasn't okay. Here's the things that I was seeing, because it doesn't always look like what they tell us it does." And I went, "Oh, I have that, and that." And if he's not okay and he's willing, a big burly dude, if he's willing to admit that he's not okay, maybe I should talk to somebody. And, you know, there's, it's that positive viewpoint, right? And finding somebody that's willing to do that with you. So.
Well, it's fascinating. I'm glad you brought that up, the PTSD side, the trauma, and having to deal with the diagnosis and other trauma. But even if someone doesn't have PTSD, I also believe that the frustration of not being able to manage their blood sugars on a daily basis, not because of their fault, because they are not given the proper education or the proper tools, that also must exacerbate that the mental burden, right? It
Oh,
can
for
be
sure.
frustrating if you're not seeing results day in, day out, and then a year later you realize this carb counting, either I'm doing something wrong, or because I felt like that.
Yeah.
The only time in
Yeah.
my life that I felt like a failure was when I had to go to the clinic and show them my results. And yet I was an expert because I did the Daphne course, carb counting course twice, and they were extensive, like 1 week long courses with exercise in there to see the impact of exercise. We went through different food label, like reading food labels. It was extensive courses, and I volunteered at my local hospital to help the newly diagnosed, to help them learn carb counting or carb count properly. I was an expert at carb counting, and yet I was a failure because it simply didn't work. It didn't work.
Right. And
Well,
that's tough when you're doing everything to a T, because that's what I was doing. I had a food scale, I had my measuring cups and everything, and I was eating what I was supposed to be eating and taking the insulin the way I was supposed to be taking it, and then it wasn't working. It's like, but I'm doing everything, and now it's like I can't do the things that I love, because I was always very physically fit. And to do Zumba, I would need 2 Pop-Tarts before Zumba. All right, well, Pop-Tarts aren't very healthy, so I was gaining weight. And but I'm eating this low-fat vegetarian diet and eating Pop-Tarts before Zumba, and then still bottoming out, so you have your 15 grams of glucose afterwards so you can drive home. And it wasn't working. It's like, is this really how my life is going to be? And then you think, okay, and I'm going to die early, and I'm going to have horrible complications, and that's just depressing. And then heaven forbid you ever have a Lantus low. That's traumatic. And also the fact that it's like you're going through mourning. It's like the death of the old you and what you thought you were going to have in your life.
And
I thought
denial.
I was going to be in the military. I thought I was going to do all these things. And instead I, was just trying to stay alive for like that first year or two. And I couldn't go work out and really healthily, and I couldn't eat the way I thought I should eat. And it's rough. It's a real rough.
Well, they
question.
blame the diabetics for the weight gain. They say, well, you're taking insulin, so you're going to gain weight. And they don't tell them that the amount of insulin they take depends on what they eat. They refuse to tell them that. You have
need your
control.
healthy whole brains, right?
Oh, God.
You gotta feed, it's your brain.
Your heart needs oatmeal, doesn't it?
Right, that's what I was eating, oatmeal, and they said lower glycemic. So I was eating oat bran for breakfast. Delicious, nutritious.
Yum.
And and I couldn't understand why, it wasn't working. Lots of oat bran, lots of bran. Let's just say my
Yeah.
Facebook recipes were the ADA like recipe stuff. I got this off of that, and it's full of Splenda, and it's got like applesauce instead of fat in it. And I used
Right.
egg beaters probably.
Margarine.
Well, I didn't
Yes.
use margarine. I had to use, in my head, I was using either extra virgin olive oil or applesauce to replace the fats. And these muffins I made were only 30 grams of carbs, and they were fat free and cholesterol free, and I was eating those.
And I was waking up
Question
4
for you.
a.m. every
Yeah.
morning to make bread at home.
Nice.
But of course, homemade bread is different, right?
So much better for you. Yeah.
Yes.
I have a question.
yes.
So
If it's sourdough, it's fine.
yeah, sourdough, right.
Fortunately, I
you
didn't
guys-
go there, but I was making bread for years. We made pasta at home and everything at home. Like we ate clean foods, but we didn't know about, I didn't know about Bernstein then. Talk about diet. This is a good time to talk about diet. So what kind of diet are you on at the moment? I think it's pretty clear you are all on a low carbohydrate diet. So let's just go through, what you eat and how you dose for protein, because that's another very important topic. And I might be the outlier here because I'm not using R. I had access to R insulin. In Canada, I walked in and I bought it. I paid for it and I bought it. You don't need a prescription, so it was very easy. I had like packs of R stocked up on it. I decided that I personally, and that's not a recommendation for everyone, but personally, I would prefer the simplicity of one insulin and my pump. In the way I manage my diabetes, I'm making it work for me. If it didn't work, then I'd have to find plan B. But I'm making it work for me. But I might be the outlier here. So let's talk about how you're dosing for protein and what you're eating in the first place.
Well, you're a technically competent pump user. We get pump users all the time. They say, let me call my specialist
Right.
and we'll adjust my dosage. That kind of fly-by-wire remote control stuff is never going to work. But my diet, I'm different probably from everybody else. I don't calculate anything. Nothing. I'm sorry, math does not even enter into this.
Aren't you an engineer though?
Yeah, but engineers tend to do things the easy way. Well, except we do get caught pushing on the pull door at the school.
I was gonna say I was in an engineering frat in college. I don't believe for a second.
What I do is I have another problem with being able to absorb nutrients because I have EPI, exocrine pancreatic insufficiency. It's not as fancy as Hashimoto's, or I'm not one of the cool kids, but I have to regiment my food. So I have 2 meals a day, the same amount of food. And since it's primarily protein, and I'm a pretty easy person to control, I have a set dose for a meal. If for some reason I want to eat more than my set dose, I want to eat half again more, I'll take half again more insulin for my set meal. If I want to eat less, have a light meal, half as much, I take half as much insulin. I haven't calculated anything ever. Not hardly ever, because I am one of the also rare people who I started off on a low carb diet from the start. There was that 1 month when I tried to follow the ADA guidelines. That cured me of trying that nonsense. So yeah, I was low carb from the beginning, and I found I don't need to calculate anything. I don't need to calculate protein. I have the same kind of meal with the same macronutrient distribution, the same volume, and I know the dose for it. And the biggest surprise is I take more insulin in the morning than the evening. I thought it was my morning meal versus my evening meal, and it wasn't. For the same meal in the morning, I'll take 4 units. And people who count carbs are going to go, what? 4 units? And for the same meal in the evening, I'll take 3 units. So there's a 25% difference between evening meal and morning meal. And I don't eat until
Normal
10.
though. Cole, that's pretty normal.
I think
Yeah.
so.
But yeah, but in everyone, non-diabetics as well. So I'm like you. I don't count anything anymore.
No.
All my training, NHS invested in me so I could volunteer, help others how to count carbs. I haven't been doing that for years and years because obviously it's a failed method. So I'm not
Just
part
one
of it. I
quick
want to be
little
part of it.
one
I
quick
don't
little
count
thing.
anything.
One quick little thing. The problem with counting carbs is there's no such thing as a carb.
Yes.
Okay, they make it sound as if you can eat bran or you can eat cornstarch and have the same effect because it's the same number of carbs. And that's so incredibly instilling those thoughts into a diabetic's head is setting them up for failure.
Yeah.
They need to know what's glycemic and what's not glycemic. So off.
Well,
Okay.
and I always look at people and say, okay, let's think about this though. You're telling me that this piece of pie and this baked potato are going to act exactly the same at the same time. Like, let's take low carb completely out of it. At the base root of counting carbs, they're telling you those are equal. If we measured our potato right, and I do this when I teach my classes, um, because I want my responders to understand why we see the patients when we see them and how they got here. Because
Yeah.
there's a great understanding of like, well, they just didn't calculate it right. I'm like, you don't have a clue what this looks like. So I have started, I give them an apple, I give them Oreos, and then usually like a cheese stick. And I know they're gonna pick the apple because it's a healthy choice, right? So I kind of stack the deck because I also know that one's gonna hit faster, right? So we start our 2-hour class and I say, cool, here's the weight of the apple. And I always pick a medium apple because what's a medium apple? What's that mean? Go to the
When you
grocery
can
store and find me
swallow
a medium
whole.
apple.
Yeah.
So we start there and I give them, this is my insulin ratios. This is what my blood sugar is. I run it live at the top of the screen and I let them pick my snack and I eat it while we teach. And then they watch live time what my blood sugar does. And we dosed appropriately. Now, obviously, I have some say in this, but I let them do this because I want them to see what it looks like, right? Oh, look, she spiked really fast. And then because the math doesn't math, but it's
Yeah.
also the only medication. There is not A plus B equals C, right? Which is why, they talk about, oh, we started them here in this math, we've got to start people somewhere. But I guarantee every single one of us, our insulin needs are massively different. There's no, and my morning insulin is different than my night insulin. We all know that because we have the years of experience, but coming into that and trying to figure that out is hard.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was pretty low carb before I was diagnosed because, as I mentioned, my A1C had been kind of creeping up over time, and I just logically assumed that carbohydrates were probably a bad thing, despite the fact that the nutritionist I saw when I had gestational diabetes told me to eat a banana with oatmeal every morning. But unlike most people in 1993, I actually had a glucose meter. And because my husband got me one from the hospital. And I saw the 300 that I had after I ate that and decided that was probably not good advice. So it was not a hard transition for me to kind of go into the more sort of type 1 Grit Bernstein realm with my eating, because when I started really having to test all the time, I was seeing that some of the things that I thought were healthy carbs were still spiking my blood sugar, like fruit, right? Whole grains. I had stopped eating white food a long time ago, thinking that the whole grains were much better for me. So I had that sort of experiential learning curve of, oh, wow, okay, the data don't lie,
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, wow, that brown rice was just as bad as the white rice. Wow, that sweet potato was just as bad as the white potato. So I very quickly found some low carb people, found the Bernstein group, watched as much of Bernstein as I thought I needed to watch. And so now basically my day is I don't eat really anything until 11, sometime after 11, between 11 and 1 usually, but I can easily go to 2 or 3 without feeling like I'm starving because I'm probably in ketosis and that makes me have lots of energy and I feel fine and I don't have a headache. As long as I have coffee with cream in the morning, I can be human until I have that first meal. And that meal is usually something like either leftover dinner, almost always leftover dinner, or 3 eggs, which used to be a really cheap choice. I'll fry up 3 eggs and maybe if I have a keto waffle that I made over the weekend left over in the fridge, I'll have that or whatever. And then dinner is a whole lot of protein of any kind. I'll eat eggs, I'll eat steak, I'll eat fish, doesn't matter, and a vegetable. And my husband has not totally adopted the way I eat, but definitely he'll eat what I eat, and then sometimes he'll make himself rice or potato, whatever, and that's fine. He can do that. I'm not tempted by those things, so I don't really care. And so then when I go out, I eat the same way. I'm like, okay, I'll have the steak. I don't want the fries or the burger with no bun, no fries. Can I still have a vegetable? Whatever. And I've basically been doing that for 11 years. And I like it. I like eating those things. I feel good. It's helping me manage my weight, which, I'm a person that has to work at keeping my weight down. And so, eating that way definitely helps. I use very little insulin. I use very little bolus insulin. My bolus ratio is like 85% basal to about 15% bolus. Sometimes the percentage is even lower on the bolus side. And in the summer or anytime that I'm super, super active, my carb ratio changes. So, and I do have a pump. I have to change it on my pump. Otherwise, it's recommending boluses for me that are way too big. Or I'll look at that and go, oh, no, that's a whole unit that's going to tank me right now. And I'll dial it back on the bolus. So being able to know, those times when you are more insulin sensitive, really helps. And I do think, not eating breakfast and the amount of activity that I get really helps with how much insulin I use. I'm certain I would be using more if I didn't do those 2 things. So that's what I do.
Sarah, are you using our insulin separately from your pump?
No, I was. When I was MDI, I was. But, I don't always get a huge rise from protein because I don't eat a lot at one sitting, right? I'm just not I'm not a huge eater. So I won't polish off a giant steak. I'd probably, but if I have a steak, I usually eat half of it and have the rest of it for lunch the next day. So it's very unusual for me to have a big protein rise. I don't get them that often. And probably also because I tend to pick fattier meats that might be kind of slowing down that spike a little bit. Yeah. But if I do need it, I'll just do an extended bolus on my pump. Not a big deal. But it's really rare that I see a protein rise, especially when I'm during this insulin sensitive period. I tend to not see it that much.
What insulin?
Oh, another cat heard from back there.
What's in your pump? Novolog?
Fiasp, actually, which my insurance doesn't cover, but luckily Windsor, Ontario is only a half an hour drive. So I go over there every 3 months and have brunch with my husband, and then we go to Shoppers Drug Mart and procure how much Fiasp we can get and drive back across the border. So totally legal.
So it's the super fast, ultra fast insulin. You're taking that for your eggs as well. All one dose.
I don't have to bolus for eggs. I don't need to bolus for eggs.
Interesting.
I just don't. I mean, and that could be because my pump is catching.
Right.
The pump might be catching it before I need to bolus for it. And because the Fiasp works so fast, that could be why I'm not seeing that rise.
Because you're looping, right?
And if I start at 80 and I get a 20-point bump, 22-point bump, I'm not going to correct that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm between 80 and 120 or 130 99% of the time. 95 maybe. Something like that. Unless I screw up, which, we all do. But yeah, I just feel like I can't underestimate or can't overestimate the importance of physical activity here. It is a game changer for me.
Yeah. Bridget, we didn't cover your insulin because I know you go on and off pumps depending on your work as a firefighter, obviously. So sometimes it's not practical to wear a pump. So
I am Probably totally different management than everybody else. I have a couple of friends that are also first responders, and we kind of all compare notes. But a lot of the things that we advocate and we say and we do don't always play nice in my world. So I'm kind of the outlier here. So diet wise, I lean a little more carnivore because I can easily get a hold of it, right? If it's 3 o'clock in the morning and we just dropped off a heart attack patient, we're all starving because that's what happens when you do that. McDonald's will make me a cheeseburger without a bun. And so we eat more fast food and convenience foods than probably most of the people in the groups that we hang out with, just because that's the world I live in. I probably also take far more insulin than everybody else here. Oh, see, there's the other one. Just because, and I think some of that is all the adrenaline dumps. Because I am to the point that I do have to cover adrenaline with insulin. It is why I loop. It's why I pump, but especially loop, because I can do that in the field now. If we pop a structure and I need to go do that, I can turn my basal down on the way in the engine on the way there. And I'm not worried about what long acting, Lantus is hanging out in the background. I don't have that concern. I have been on an insulin pump probably 90% of my fire career, because I was diabetic before I started, and pre-looping, pre-CGM days, all of that tech has made things a lot easier to control. I actually had to medically retire for a little bit in the interim before I became low carb, and we kind of gained some tech and went, hey, there's some ways we can work on this. So it's a lot smoother. But I don't have the easy button that sometimes we talk about. I love Susan, but she talks about like, oh, it's just easy. And I'm like, I don't have that experience.
Yeah.
Also, Bridget, I think too, because you've been diagnosed for so much longer than I have.
Yeah.
And Paul, because you were diagnosed when you were already in crisis, I guarantee you I still have some beta cells.
Oh yeah.
And I thank my low carb diet for that, because
I do too.
there's no way.
I actually talked to my endo the other day, and then we had a blizzard and I didn't get to see him. So I will see him in May. But we're going to rerun C-peptide on me because we can.
I bet you got nothing.
I don't know. We haven't got it back yet. But we talked about it that because again, the endo I have, we play with these things and we have these discussions, is willing to run some of this stuff, because the number of people that are like, well, my doctor said I can't start insulin because I'm still making insulin.
Oh God. I hate
That's
that.
That's a big one. Yep.
What does the almost 30 years of injected insulin as a type 1? Because I've never been off insulin.
Yeah.
Even when I was honeymooning, I was taking R and NPH.
Mm.
I had beautifully pristine flat lines so that we could see at least. And I would go in and they'd be like, well, what are your symptoms of a high? And we'd go, I don't know. I've never had one since diagnosis, But yeah, so injected insulin for close to 30 years. What is that sitting at? Because then we can say, hey, I still have, because I suspect it sputters. It's not real helpful, but occasionally it shows up because you go, well, what was that? But yeah, I think that plays into it too. I think the just wear and tear on my pancreas, and partially because, again, they told me I wouldn't make it to 40 or 30. And so I just kind of, it wasn't so much the diet that went crazy, but the lifestyle choices. I took advantage of the I'm alive and I'm here and I'm going to experience all the things I can. Hindsight, right? Probably a lot more. I would have told you years ago I'm not an adrenaline seeker. The older I get, the more I'm like, maybe.
I was going to ask this earlier, you guys. I have never had an endocrinologist warn me of potential complications.
Never,
Wow.
never, never.
Yeah.
I
was
did
one.
in the how they worded it was, if you don't manage it properly and your blood sugar is uncontrolled, there can be complications. But they never defined what uncontrolled was.
Never,
Now,
not a single one.
now
They,
at the time, right, our ranges were 70 to 150. And my first endo was like, we really don't want you running in that 150, but occasionally you'll probably spike there. So I actually had a really solid base of old school endocrinology that, yeah, they wanted us eating, you know, proteins at this amount and low fat protein and vegetables. And they didn't push the fruit, they didn't push the grains. That came once, because I'm an old diabetic, that came once we started seeing the fast acting insulins. But if you're dosing everything off of R and NPH, in carb counts, right? I still look at, if somebody's like, well, how many carbs are in that? I still look at it, count it in calculations, and then convert it over, because that's, my brain is just trained that way. I think that we really saw, between pump usage becoming more mainstream and then the really fast acting insulin showing up, is when it became well, you can just eat ice cream. Because even if we were eating ice cream, you had to plan it a half an hour ahead of time, and you're going to dose, or you just downright planned it for your meal times, right? I ate dinner every day at 5:30. That was not optional because of the way the insulin dosing was set up. If you didn't, you got in trouble. So road trips as a family, right? We'd be looking at the map and going, okay, do we need to stop here and find something to do? Or will we be in a town at 5:30?
Yeah,
So I
because
think
Bridget
that,
had to eat. So I went through that
yeah,
because I was at school. Because okay, I'm different from all of you here because I was diagnosed at 5. I remember in grade 1, my teacher would actually bring me my lunchbox to my desk, and all my friends were doing their activities, and I had to sit there and eat. I felt awful, but I had to eat at certain times.
yep.
It wasn't bad management at all. But talking of the complication warning, the only time I was actually warned, monitored very closely with daily phone calls, morning and afternoon and evening, and that sort of thing, was when I was pregnant. Yeah, but
Yeah.
so
when
Paul,
I,
talk about your diet. I think, sorry.
let's go ahead.
Okay, Paul talked about his diet. I
Yeah.
How
think
about Stephanie?
Stephanie's not covered that, but
I bet she's carnivore.
yeah, she's carnivore.
Yeah.
But
That's
the question
boring.
is, what kind of carnivore? Do you
All
put
right.
salt on your steak, or do you put
So
pepper or not? So
I mainly eat beef. I every morning. I found out I'm also intolerant to chicken eggs like a year or two ago, so I had to cut this out. So I eat pretty much every morning a burger patty, 6-ounce burger patty with a slice of cheddar cheese. Now here comes the rebellious thing. I like to put guacamole on it. All right. So that's my big plant food there. It's a fruit.
Rebel.
I tell people when they're like, "What do you eat?" I'm like, "I had a fruit this morning." You know,
Exactly.
I'm bothered, but yeah. So I eat this big honkin' cheeseburger, no bun, just that salt on there, a cup of coffee with either heavy cream or half and half, and I do measure that out because you if you drink as much coffee as I do, it adds up. So and right as soon as I get up, I take a half unit per foot on the floor. And then I take 1 unit of R for my breakfast. Lunch is usually another burger with cheese on it and salt. Sometimes I'll have more guacamole. If I'm feeling like, crazy, I might have some vegetables. I have a lot of frozen vegetables because plants are optional in my house for me and my husband. So I might have broccoli, maybe some green beans, but yeah, it's if I feel like it. It's a flavor. I don't really Oh man, doctors love when I say I don't really eat plant foods for nutrition. I eat it because it's like I want some flavor. Uh, so I'll have another burger, and then I don't take any R. And then about an hour later or so, I work out. I try to work out after lunch, but I don't cover the hamburger, and that protein rise is what covers my walk and my weightlifting and my yoga, whatever I'm doing. And then dinner, and mind you, this is like a 6 ounce burger. Like it's around like 40 to 50 grams of protein per meal. And then dinner is usually more beef or chicken or fish, shrimp, whatever I'm craving, more salt. I might have cauliflower. Nothing starchy. If berries are in season, I might splurge on a couple of berries, but I'll have usually, some shrimp, another burger, some steak, roast beef that I've made in the crock pot. That's what we have left over today. And I use R, but at night, if I have, let's say I have another 6 ounce portion of something like roast beef that's a lot leaner, I will have to take a unit of R up front, and then about an hour and a half, 2 hours later, I'll take another half unit, because in the evening, when you lay down, your digestion slows down. And so some of that will make your blood sugar creep up. And so I need to cover that overnight if I've eaten either late or a larger portion of food for dinner. Yeah, but mainly beef is my favorite. I eat a lot of ground beef. I'll get those sleeves of hamburgers that are like not very expensive, and I can eat them like all day long. Like I don't really get sick of them. And then dark chocolate. Gotta have a square dark chocolate on occasion. And then the rest is just water, maybe some sort of electrolyte, or I'll use just plain old salt and add it to my drinks if I can't find an electrolyte drink, because like if you're on the road or what have you, salt packets work just fine. I know they might be iodized or have dextrose, but they've never bothered me, and it just makes it manageable. But I tend to call how I eat set it and forget it, because it's just very, just like Paul does. It's pretty much, it's monotonous, but I already know what's going to happen, and I already know how it's going to react with my digestion and my body. There's no curveballs. And so yeah, if we go out to lunch and there's a steak on the menu or a burger, or you can get grilled salmon. You just ask a couple questions like, what kind of seasonings do you use? Is there any breading or what's in the burger? Make sure there isn't any added carbs. Like sometimes they'll have breadcrumbs or an egg or what have you. And then you say, well, I've worked in kitchens. We weigh out things like that because of food costs. So they can tell you that hamburger patty raw is 6 ounces or 5 ounces, or that steak is this many ounces. And then I just dose from there. And it really simplifies things. I've been to Disney World twice with the nieces. I live off of those cheeseburgers. And that's what I do. And then I give them the sides. They get the chips or the French fries or whatever, because they eat that stuff. And then Aunt Stephanie eats the cheeseburger patty, and you can get a cup of guacamole there too. And so, and lots of bacon when I'm out at Disney, lots and lots of bacon. And it works. It works really well for me.
Stephanie, what long-acting insulin are you using?
I'm utilizing a Medtronic pump. So I use Novolog, which I find to be very handy, because like Bridget does, you can lower your basal rates if you need to, or raise them, or do very small corrections. I don't loop because I don't trust it yet, as I have to be in control. But and then I use a Dexcom G7, but I can take only 1/10 of a unit or even smaller with the Medtronic to correct. So if I am 120 and I want to target the 100 or 83 or what have you, I can take literally this tiny little bit of insulin extra to bring me down. And same with the different seasons, like Sara was talking about, the springtime or summer, or even our hormones. I'm hitting perimenopause. Things are changing. And I've got different profiles for different parts of the month. And they're going to change again because I'm going outside more, and I try to make sure my vitamin D levels are good, but more circadian rhythms are changing. So my insulin sensitivity usually will start going up about now. So I'll be going in and making these tiny little changes to all of my basal rates, just a little step down a little bit. And it just works really, really well for me.
Yeah, I mean, mine has the loop built in to it, and I'm on the Omnipod, but I've switched it off, so I use it on manual mode, just manually, because I do a better job. So, Paul, we didn't cover your insulin. What insulins are you on at the moment?
Okay, I am the designated caveman. As you could probably tell with my attitudes towards doctors, I use NPH and R, and I figured out how to make it work extremely well. And the big value to it is number one, it's very simple with my diet. And the second thing is I don't ever want to have to beg for insulin. If somebody tries to tell me no, I tell them to go pound sand. It's that has great value for me. It really does. I don't get anxious with a doctor's appointment. Is she going to try and cut my insulin and blah blah? No, no. I'm the one who makes this work, and I'm the one who makes the decisions, and that's just the way it is. I I listen to her. I'm polite. I know she means well, but I'll listen to her and I'll say, "Well, that's cool, but we're not going to do that." Uh,
I'm not
and
gonna do that. But, so how do you use your MPH as a long acting? Just one shot or two or three?
because I don't know why. Number one, like Sarah, I believe I still have a significant amount of basal cell activity. I mean, it's not honeymoon. I mean, it isn't like I could quit taking insulin for a day. I'd end up in the hospital. Uh, but because of the diet, I think I've talked to a lot of people who are on NPH who are also trying to have more of a liberal diet, and it caused them nothing but nightmares. So I'm a firm believer in yes, it works and it works well, but it's not for everything. So I use NPH for my basal and I use R for bolus for food. I also use it for corrections and I take it intramuscular. And I find that R intramuscular works about as fast as uh, one of the rapid insulins, one of the analogs.
Really interesting.
Yeah. Um, Now,
So
one of the analogs intramuscular is probably like rocket science, but
It's steep. But
yeah,
if you're high, like I've only done that once, and it was when I was sick, and
yeah.
my blood sugar would not go under like 250. I'd spiked up to 300, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this is the first time I know what to do. And I went and I drove up a half a unit of Novolog, and I put it in my deltoid very dramatically because I got to be a jokester about everything, but it worked.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, here we go. And I was like, remember, it only should drop you this much. And you're already insulin resistant. It's not going to tank you. You're going to just get it down so it can be more manageable. And then, like, you watch on your Dexcom and your Dexcom's freaking out. And then it
But
stopped.
that's a really important thing. The main reason why I do intramuscular injections is less of a worry of stacking because yes, it acts quickly,
Yep.
but it
In
also
and out
clears
quickly.
quickly.
Yeah, it's done. Yeah.
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 So I
I
could
haven't
say
tried one with Fias. Fias was so fast already. I don't know
You
what would
probably
happen
just
if I did it.
think about it and then it already
Yeah.
happens. You don't even have to do it. You just go,
Yeah.
I'm going to do
for
it. And
anyone,
I am Fios, and it's
your
done.
eyeballs would probably pop out.
yeah, I think you really need to describe exactly what that's about for someone who's completely new to this. So who's gonna explain?
You mean intramuscular?
Yes. So
Okay.
what's that about?
Um, yeah. How fast your insulin acts depends on where you inject it. When you inject it into your fat, you're not really injecting it into the fat. You know, there's one little fat cell you might hit, but you're injecting it into what's called the interstitial fluid. And this is lymph. This takes a long time to mobilize and move. This is why CGMs run 15, 20 minutes behind a finger stick, is because there's no pressure, there's no movement, there's no volume. It's why you get compression lows with a CGM, because you put a little bit of weight on there and it's going to completely displace that fluid. There's nothing to read. So with an intramuscular injection, because you're injecting it into the muscle, you're going into that highly vascularized tissue, and it's going to be absorbed in your bloodstream much more quickly. IVs is what they do in the hospital. They hang a bag of saline and inject the insulin into the drip, so that, and that's blindingly, well, Bridget knows more about that than I do. I've never done that, but so an intramuscular
We don't
injection.
dose insulin in the field.
Right.
Even nobody plays with that world. Even the ER doesn't usually play with that world.
Well,
Sometimes
you rarely
we're
do
starting.
glucagon either, do you?
They do what, Dex 50 or Dex 5 or something?
So it used to be D50.
D50.
Thankfully, we have walked away from that a little bit because the D50 is so. It's you take a patient that's already on that roller coaster and you just sped that roller coaster up because it is so strong. Glucagon, we see some. I have fought for a long time to get it where, so like at the hospital, they'll teach you how to do glucagon. Teachers, school staff, parents, right? We teach all these people. As for our licensure level, we were not allowed to give glucagon in the field, which was dumb because I can teach a first grade teacher to do it. Why can't the person with the medical license do it? We finally got that pushed through that as a statewide, they'll let us do it. Now, the advantage to that is some of our rural communities, right? We can hand this to somebody with proper training and they can give it if needed, right? Because they may have a 2-hour transport to the hospital. We, on where I'm at, don't give it. We can, but we don't, because I would rather take that saline or that dextrose solution. We're running usually D10-ish, and we're going to tirate that, right? So your blood sugar was 23. I'm going to start that IV, let it flow until I bring you up into the 80s, and then I'm going to turn it off. Because now you've regained consciousness. Now you feel better. We're not going to just keep dumping that in there, which is why I'm glad we don't have D50 anymore, because it doesn't take very much D50 before you're not happy on the other end and you're throwing up in my ambulance, and I don't like that. And neither do you. Which we see with glucagon a lot too, right? It spikes, it causes that dump, and then and having had to take glucagon as a patient, I try not to do that to my patients. It's not pleasant at all. But yeah, so the advantage to the IV solution is that we can slowly control that. And then if you start dropping again, we can just turn it back on. So it's actually better for us as a patient rather than using some other things. But yeah, you also have to have somebody that's willing to sit there and watch it and play that balance game. And sometimes, depending on staffing or where you're at, it doesn't work that way.
Well, and
I'm
you
always
said
shocked when I'm in. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Paul. When I'm in the parents groups and I see these parents giving the schemia, whatever that stuff is, or glucagon for like a 60 blood sugar. Like, could I give him glucagon? And when people are going, yes, give him glucagon. No. Have you ever given anyone glucagon? Have you ever seen anybody after they've had glucagon? And the fact that people are being given and prescribed glucagon without any appropriate guidelines on how and when to use it is another failure of the system.
Yeah.
And they don't tell you, give the person the glucagon who's unconscious probably, and roll them onto their side, because the number of people who aspirate vomit is just huge. Yeah. No,
and nobody's reading those detailed instructions in that thing when they're given the glucagon. They've never opened that package. They've never read the instructions. They're going to go, okay, spray it in his nose or inject, boom. And then, oops, I'm supposed to roll him on his side. Oh, I'm supposed to actually medical care after I've given glucagon. Like, they don't know that.
Well,
And
and you're
that's
not
disturbing.
supposed to be by yourself for 2 or 3 days afterward because it spikes you, but then you have no reserves. So you do
Right.
this and you feel horrible. There's people that have musculature reactions to it. It's not pleasant.
So it
Yeah,
deletes
no,
your
I've had it once and I try really hard not to do it again. And I only claim like half credit for that because the reason I needed it wasn't my fault. So I only like the hospital we switched. My insulin pump had died, so we switched me back to MDI. My new pump came in. We did the math. They did the math wrong, and they massively miscalculated my basal rates. And so I came home, and within 24 hours was not appropriately responsive. And my husband got to glucagon me, which hindsight, there's a funny story there. We're both medical professionals, right? We both have licenses. But again, at the time, the state did not allow us as providers to give glucagon. We were trained at the hospital how to give it during all of our training. We weren't married yet. So he missed that particular portion of training. Didn't think about this because I just, so he actually messaged or called one of our paramedic friends and was like, so where am I supposed to give this? Because we didn't have the training on it. I did, but that was not helpful. And yeah, so, and then my mother-in-law got to come over and babysit me for 2 days because I couldn't be by myself. And my kids were little enough that they weren't babysitting me yet. So I think Taylor was maybe 2. So yeah, it was all kinds of fun.
It's been a wonderful, wonderful discussion or conversation, really. I call it chit chat. I don't know if did you guys use chit chat? You say that in
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a wonderful chit chat. I really, really enjoyed it. So is there anything else that you would like to say to end this with? We can always record another episode, by the way. There's always more to talk about, as
There is.
was saying. Your final words?
Advocate for your best care.
Yes.
Advocate. Don't take an answer for another. Make them explain things to you and answer your questions. Push.
And as a caveat to that, or a corollary to that, rather, if you're not getting what you asked for, demand that it be noted in your chart. I asked you for fast-acting insulin because my blood sugars have been over 300 after my meals. You refused to prescribe it for me. I would like you to note that in my chart. That sounds just litigious enough to get shit done. So I'm just saying.
And if something seems odd or weird, right? If you're like, boy, that just doesn't make sense, ask questions, right? That's usually sometimes this world is odd, and yeah, that's accurate. We recently dealt with somebody that was like, hey, I just realized that I have to take insulin for my food, and we're like, yes, right? But I think all of us would rather have that conversation and have you asking those questions like, is this correct? And be like, you're on the right track, right? That's why we all put the hours in that we do, because we want everybody to succeed. And we want you to have the opportunity to go, okay, I am comfortable with this range. I know that, it's not as normal, but this is where I'm comfortable. But you need to make that decision, not your doctor. Your doctor can't say, oh, well, you're in your 90s, therefore it really doesn't matter if you're 280. That's their call. That's your call, right? Sometimes there's trade-offs that we have to make, right? I know that my career choices lead to my blood sugar control. That's something that I walked into knowing. I've seen it and I'm comfortable with it. It means that my blood sugar looks different than Sarah's and my insulin use is different. I'm okay with that.
My advice is if somebody actually cares about you, whether they're a medical provider, family, or friend, they will not try to bully or guilt trip you
Yes.
into doing something that could hurt you. So if you are eating in a way that gives you great results, makes you feel good, you're healthy, and you're able to live a life that is very fulfilling, but you've got that one relative or a doctor who starts saying, but don't you want to be normal? Don't you want to do something like, don't you want to have cake on your birthday? And you can have cake. You just have to make it differently. But they're talking about Dairy Queen or the sheet cake from Walmart. That person isn't really looking out for you, and you need to have a conversation with yourself about that because people who truly care about you aren't going to intimidate you, force you, or curse you in order to hurt yourself with food. Yeah, it's not a cool thing.
Very good.
And
Very
what
good.
I would say, this isn't, I mean, my platform really, but I shouldn't be adding to what you said. But what I would say is if you are online seeking information, pick carefully what groups you're getting your information from, because I see people in mainstream groups. I've just been diagnosed. What do you guys eat? And then everyone says like something complete. You get thousands of different answers.
Yeah.
So pick your groups. Pick groups which are managed properly, like Stephanie
Right.
and like the LADA groups where people care and push for normal blood sugars and they understand type 1 diabetes. Don't
If
go to
they're
mainstream groups and ask what do you eat and how much insulin to dose.
if they're posting their Dexcom graphs and posting that they're mountain biking and these beautiful plates of food, and the kids are smiling and talking about how they're exceeding the expectations for growth and school, and you want that positive stuff. If the entire group is everybody talking about agony and
amputations
and talking about how I let little
Eyeball
Billy,
shots.
I gave Billy enough units of insulin to cover 100 carbs and just had him eat as much of his Halloween candy as he wanted because I want him to feel normal. That's not normal. That's not healthy for anybody. That's not something you want to be a part of. All right, this isn't somebody saying they ate 2 bites of Auntie Muriel's dessert that she makes every year, and they just did a taste and and had some moderation on it. Like, yeah, if it's full of misery and people just sad all the time or posting from the hospital, taking DKA selfies, like that's not the goal in life. Like you want follow the successes. Follow
And
the
what and
Yeah,
watch
thank
for
you
the
for
crab.
bringing that up.
Watch for the crab bucket.
the
It's,
crab bucket indeed.
if there are people in the group who are pulling you down for doing better than they are, you're not in the right group.
Yep, crab mentality. And Paul, it's interesting that you said that because I was just going to say something that I had posted years ago, which was, when you're out in a group and you see somebody crushing it, instead of trying to pull them down or diminish what they're doing, your first reaction should be, hey, how are you doing that?
Yeah.
And that's what I did. It was like, I'm looking at these graphs going, holy crap, they're that flat line. That's beautiful. How did you do that? Like my endocrinologist walked into the room with my Dexcom graph. How did you do this?
Yeah.
Right? That curiosity is your friend.
Yeah.
Wonderful messages. And we're going to end this conversation here, but there will be many more to come, people. Thank you for watching. And thank you, Paul and Stephanie and Sarah and Bridget. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nayiri.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.